Welcome to the Pindown, your Detroit Pistons podcast. I'm your host, Wes Davenport from Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys.
And I'm Blake Silverman, writer for Detroit Bad Boys, covering everything from the Pistons to the NBA draft and the Motor City Cruise.
All right, Blake, I am back. I am back from the overseas vacation. We are going a day early here just because I'm traveling again this weekend, but we wanted to avoid the whole hotel thing after last week with some audio issues. But before we even get into some Pistons stuff, we got the Olympics going on, man. How much do you watch, first of all? And then let's talk about the game that just recently ended against South Sudan.
Yeah, I've been pretty into the Olympics, honestly. I mean, it's just been fun to have on the screen, like while I'm working and everything, listen in. If something crazy is happening, then tilt my head over. So it's been fun. I've been dialed in. Obviously, it's better when the time zone is more aligned with our time zone, but it's still been fun. A nice thing to pay attention to when something's going on during the day. How about you?
Man, I've watched them more in the past than I have this year. I feel like I've just been really busy recently.
You're a busy
And then
guy.
obviously, well, I don't know about that, but I'm playing catch up after being gone for 2 weeks. So I didn't really have as much time so far to watch it. But I'm looking forward to watching some more games for the basketball team. I caught the one on, I believe it was Sunday or Monday, where Kevin Durant just went nuts for absolutely no reason. That was awesome. So I don't know. I'm excited. I like watching the gymnastics too, the track and field stuff. It's just a good time. Go USA.
Yeah, and I don't think the track has happened yet. I think it
Mhm.
kicks on this weekend. So I'm excited for that. The gymnastics has been really fun. USA basketball has been fun. I don't know if you've caught at all the 3-on-3 teams, but both the men's
No.
and women's USA 3-on-3 teams are 0-2, which is not good.
Isn't Jimmer Fredette on the men's team?
Yes, he is, and so is Rick Barry's son, Canyon Barry. There's like,
Oh God, does he shoot under him?
yes,
Oh,
he
that's
does.
awesome.
There's very oddly specific qualifications for you to be able to be on those 3-on-3 teams. So that's why it's not like Jaylen Brown on the 3-on-3 team or whatever it is. So there you have to play in all these qualification tournaments and be in the ranking. So that's why it's a little oddly specific players on those rosters and probably not the best ones that we can throw out there.
I don't know though. I mean, if you got Jimmer out there, I might need to tune in. I still remember him when he was in college, and that was just some crazy hype back in the day. That was fun.
Well, you may not be able to tune in that much longer because they're probably going to be out of it as soon as they can. I don't know how the format is, but they've played 2 games. I'm assuming they at least have one more. So your time may be limited.
Well, let's just quickly for a couple minutes talk some Team USA. I wanted to get your reaction to the Jason Tatum not playing, not starting kind of drama, and then today against South Sudan, he did start. So, what has your take been on all of that? I've been a little confused why the internet seems so riled up over Team USA rotations, to be honest.
I'm confused why Tatum didn't play the first game, but yeah, like you said, he started in their second game against South Sudan, but then Joel Embiid didn't play, so now that's going to be a big thing. I don't really know. Like Steve Kerr has to just have I don't know what's going on. It has to be so hard to plan these rotations, and it seems like someone is always going to be the odd man out, and he's doing something different every game, which I guess makes sense when you have a team of all these all-stars. What else are you going to do? But yeah, the internet is running wild with Tatum getting no minutes and now Embiid getting no minutes too. We'll see. I think the Team USA already qualified for the knockout round, so I don't know what's going to happen in their last game of the group stage. Like maybe it'll be weird rotations because I'm sure it matters somewhat, but probably not a ton. But yeah, what are you gonna do? I guess with all these guys, like someone has to sit. There's not minutes for everyone, but Tatum not playing was definitely a little bit of a surprise.
I think Tatum's teammate, Derek White, is the only player that doesn't have an all-star appearance on the resume. Because doesn't Drew Holiday have one? I thought he did. I'm not 100% confident on that. But while you look that up, I believe I think it was Omari that mentioned this on the Pistons Pulse just recently. But on this last game for the group stage, the point differential matters for seeding. So they should still basically be trying to run it up, which could be pretty entertaining to watch, I would think.
Okay. And yeah, Drew Holiday is a 2-time NBA All-Star.
There it is.
One of those in 2013, which I feel like is pretty early in his career. I was not expecting that one. The other one's in 2023.
Man, I forgot about that 2013 one. He was with the Sixers still. That was before he got traded.
Yeah, he was traded to New Orleans at the 2013-14 season. So it might have been his first season in New Orleans.
Cool.
Or last one in Philly. It was either one of those.
And wasn't that the whole oh gosh, see now we're just reminiscing because it's the off season, so bear with us. But wasn't that the whole Nerlens Noel deal as well? Where I think New Orleans got upset about the injury stuff with Noel. Someone was upset about Nerlens's injury history as the trade continued on down into the future. The drama of the tanking Sixers.
Yep, he was traded to the Pelicans in exchange for Nerlens Noel and the Pelicans 2014 first round picks. So that's the one I forgot about that trade. Honestly, that's a interesting / funny one to look back on.
All of those trades were just a little unhinged. That was the process. Sixers were the only thing that really came out of it positively was Joel Embiid, and you know what? He's really good. So I guess you can't complain too much. But what a time! What a time in NBA history.
Oh my gosh, yeah, those years, and I mean those were the Tatum Brown years too, when Philly went another way. So, and I mean, in the time, like, I think it was understandable, but looking back on it, it's like things could have been a lot differently.
All right, well, let's get into some questions. That's enough Team USA. That'll wrap up our Team USA podcast. Now we move on to the Pindown. So thank you for pairing with us on that, guys. Let's start with this one from our guy, a fella. Just says, any thoughts on what JB Bickerstaff did defensively in Cleveland scheme-wise, and how much of that might translate into this year?
So there is a video I watched, I believe it's on NBA.com, where JB Bickerstaff is talking about protecting the paint. And that's a big thing for any team. But he talked about how he trusted his big men at Mobley and Jarrett Allen to be able to switch on to smaller players, which really helped them protect the paint and have really like all angles covered. You had your guards and help position because your bigs were able to do that. I don't know, or I guess I should say, I really don't think that he'll be able to do the same sort of idea in Detroit, just because of personnel wise. He was in a very specific situation with Cleveland where the personnel on the team, the two bigs and Mobley and Allen, you pretty much had to play them together, and that helped with a ton of things there. He also mentioned how he trusted them really to stay in front of smaller players, and then at the rim, they obviously have the advantage there. I can see some of the similar help wise. Like, I think Cade is going to be expected to be in help position at all times. Like, I don't think it's not going to be okay for anyone to just be standing there ball watching on defense, lose their man and everything. So I know just from like that whole thing that I watched, and seemingly from what Cleveland did, switching is probably ideal and big emphasis on protecting the paint. It's just that's a little bit of a question for the Pistons when you have Jalen Duren, who you hope takes a leap defensively, and then your other bigs and Isaiah Stewart and Paul Reed. Like, yes, Paul Reed is a good rim protector for his size, but he's not. The team just doesn't have a size advantage like JB worked with in Cleveland. So I think he's going to have to do something a little bit different because of that.
And in Memphis, I mean, he had a big size advantage in Memphis as well. I think you bring up a really good point, and that's just that, the scheme that he was able to run in both locations is not something that the Pistons have the personnel to mimic at all now. I will say that I do think a good portion of that scheme was probably just because of the personnel that they had in Memphis and in Cleveland, being that they did have two somewhat mobile bigs, not necessarily pure switch bigs, but big, long guys that can protect the paint, block some shots, and occasionally switch out onto smaller wings and be fairly effective in that. So I do think that a lot of that was probably personnel driven. So you could probably expect to see a change in the scheme that he runs in Detroit that more fits the personnel that the Pistons have. One thing that was pretty consistent between all the stops, right? Cleveland, Memphis, and now Detroit, is that there really have not been any, at least that I can think of off the top of my head, big minute guard defenders for JB Bickerstaff. He has been able to cover the butts of, John Morant, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Luke Kennard, etc. So I think that should give some hope. I think you're right in that we're going to see a lot of small to small switching. That seems to be something that has been consistent, and I'm not sure why that would change. I do wonder if we're going to get to see a little bit more drop coverage, though. Of the bigs that the Pistons have, really Isaiah Stewart's the only one I would trust to consistently switch out to guards and wings. Jalen Duren and Paul Reed, you might be able to get away with it occasionally, especially in a pinch if your guy just gets caught on the screen and you need him to step up. But the trouble with Jalen Duren is that he's really not good at either coverage, and you really don't want him blitzing either because he doesn't recover all that well. So you're kind of painted into a corner with that one. I think he might be more effective at drop just because of how vertically athletic he is. And, having him back up and see what's happening in front of him might help to speed up his processing a little bit as he's taking in that more information at his own pace. And Paul Reed, I actually think, was a guy in Philadelphia that acquitted himself pretty well to drop coverage, if my memory is correct. So, yeah, I just wonder if instead of a full-on switching scheme, more along the lines of what you saw Bickerstaff teams do in the past, you're going to see more of a guard-to-guard, wing-to-wing switch team with some drop coverage mixed in. So think more similar to Milwaukee's a team that does this with Brook Lopez. Everyone but Brook Lopez more or less switches. I wonder if we're going to see more of that type of structure.
One thing I meant to bring up with the whole switching in Cleveland that JB talked about is he mentioned that he expected his guys to only switch on ball and they don't switch off ball. So I think we might see a little bit more of that just because when dribble handoffs, whatever it is, you're getting a driver and you have a big or defender that's in better position to take that man, and your other players, whoever the on-ball defender is that is switching, knows that scheme and everything, and that puts guys in help position as well. If there's someone on the wing and there's a dribble handoff at the top of the key, you can make up some ground there without sagging too far off your man. So I think we could see some of that, but again, just because of the personnel in Cleveland, I don't think it'll be totally the same, and it'll also be matchup dependent on what whoever the opponent is that night.
The other kind of fun thing to think about with this is, like you mentioned, the help stuff, right? generally speaking, a team that helps more into driving lanes is more open to kickouts, easy kickouts. Okay. So for the Pistons, maybe you could structure lineups with really athletic wing players, which they now have in Ron Holland and Asar Thompson, and really lean into that help aspect because a guy like Asar or a guy like Ron Holland can close ground so quickly. Cleveland was able to do that with Isaac Okoro and a couple other bench defenders that they had. So I think that could be something fun that we get to see them figure out live as the season's going on. How much can they commit to help in the driving lanes so that they can still get back and contest the 3-point shots? Because those open 3-point looks, as we all know, most valuable shot in basketball. That's not a free throw or a wide open layup. So it'll be interesting, I think, watching the team and the coach figure out how hard to help on on the nail drives and things like that. I'm really excited to watch it.
That's the other thing. JB had those wing defenders, like you mentioned, in Cleveland. Like there was Dean Wade there too. I don't know if he overlapped with the Lauri Markkanen year in Cleveland, but I think some of the players that the Pistons brought in will be able to help with that. I mean, hopefully you're not employing a lineup where that has a wing defender that you don't trust at least somewhat defensively, because they're going to be expected to help protect the rim as well. Like, I mean, you got to protect the paint, which was such a glaring need for this team next year. Personnel wise, I don't know if you brought in the players necessarily to do that, but hopefully Jalen Duren can take a leap defensively, and some of the other players that you brought in can at least help. And Asar as well. He's already a solid defender, but just like growing more in that sense too.
So here's a question that I had, and I wanted to ask you before we got into just briefly discussing some new Pistons news that happened over the past week. In your mind, who is the best two-way player on this roster?
Oh my gosh.
That's a tough one.
That is hard. I mean, can I say Cade?
You can, but you're going to have to defend it because he's really not been a good defender.
I know. The only reason my mind immediately goes there is just because everything he brings offensively, which isn't fully the question. So other than Cade, oh my gosh, like I don't want to say Tobias Harris either. Like it's a tough one. I can't say Ron Holland. He hasn't been proven. I can't say Asar because of what he is offensively. So I think I'm talking myself into sticking with Cade, with the hope that he's not a good defender, but just that he can stay afloat and hopefully be covered by the four players around him. And just not like he's not a Donovan Mitchell or like Darius Garland, yeah. I would say. So I think I have to stick with him, but I definitely do not love my answer.
All right, let me throw two names at you, and I want to know which one you trust more as a pure two-way guy. All right, so Isaiah Stewart, he's a 3-and-D big. Defense is really good. Jump shot's pretty good. Doesn't bring much else though on offense. And then Simone Fontecchio.
Fontecchio was the other one that was crossing my mind. So it's tough because Stewart's clearly the better defender, but I think I'm going to just lean towards Fontecchio because I like how he's able to space the floor and do a little bit of other stuff on offense. And I think he improved defensively from his first year in the NBA. So maybe, I mean, he is an older player, so I don't think he has a crazy high ceiling as a defender, but I don't know. I think he can do some stuff. So out of those names, although Stewart is clearly the better defender, I might give Fontecchio the nod just for what he does on offense and also being like a halfway decent defender.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting between those two, and we agree too much because I'd pick Fontecchio, and Tech would probably be the best two-way player in my estimation on the roster. But that's just because he can do a lot on offense. We saw when he was in Detroit last season, he was at about 15 points per game. It was very, very efficient. He wasn't doing it on a lot of shots. It was primarily catch and shoot, dribble handoff stuff, and then occasionally taking an ISO or a fast break whenever the opportunity presented itself advantageously. So I think offensively, he's a very, very good wing. And then you add on top of that, he's a fine athlete, not great, not bad, just fine as NBA athletes go. And he's big. He's a really big three. I think he's 6'8", 6'9", something like that, with long arms. He's a big dude. He's strong. So he stays in front fairly well. He's not an amazing defender. I'd say he's probably average is where I'd grade him out at, but that's average at a premium position with significantly plus offense. So I think when you're putting the whole package together, that's probably the best this team has to offer.
And you're just paying him $8 million, which is nice. That's a win. I mean, who knows what went into that deal? Still surprised at how low the number was, but I think that's a win for the front office after maybe the Tobias Harris signing was a little bit more than you wanted to give up. You made up for it a little bit with the Fontecchio deal.
Tech is on an absolute steal of a deal. I remember you and I were talking, maybe he'd be pushing up to 18 or 20 a season, and on a longer contract, mind you.
Anymore. No speculating.
Hey, we prefaced that by saying we were bad at it, but it's fine. We had to do what we had to do. He took a shorter contract, so he obviously wants to get back and make more money later on. But man, is that deal a steal. And our guy YouTube user says Simone Fontecchio is the best two-way player on the roster in theory right now, but his sample size in Detroit is so small. What I would say to that is he was doing it all season last year in Utah. He was starting in Utah for the Jazz this season before he was moved to Detroit and just playing the exact same way on slightly lower offensive volume. So I'm pretty comfortable with it. I don't think it's necessarily an in theory thing right now, even though the specifically Detroit sample size is pretty small. What do you think before I break that Pistons news we got outlined here?
Not necessarily on Fontecchio, but speaking of small sample size in Detroit, if Quentin Grimes was still here, does he have a say in this conversation?
No, but only because I was really hedging my bets on that jump shot. If he stayed in Detroit and he played the first 3 weeks of the season and shot the ball well, then yeah, it was a no-brainer. He definitely would have been. But that jumper was rough when he got into Detroit. As much as I wanted to believe in it, it's very much a hypothetical until he proves otherwise. So I'd still say no.
He's probably going to shoot like 38 to 40% in Dallas.
I hope so. I hope he does. He's a good player. It'd be a bummer if it just completely fell out the bottom like that on him. But all right, let's get to some Pistons news really quickly before we move on to other questions. We have a new assistant coach per Adrian Wojnarowski, Vitaly, and I'm going to butcher this, but Potapenko. It sounds like he's more of a big man / defensive oriented coach and has overlap with Bickerstaff in both Memphis and Cleveland. And then Trajan Langdon also wrapped up his leadership in the front office. And, a couple of the highlights are the names we already know: Michael Blackstone, Dennis Lindsey, J.R. Holden. It sounds like Dwayne Casey is sticking around. There was a Corey Schlesinger that got brought in, but he is not the fullback from the Lions. So that would have been fun. But yeah, unfortunately. But the storyline just isn't there. And then George David was promoted to senior VP. So of those, does anything stand out to you? Anything you want to riff off of for a minute before we move on to some other questions?
I don't know a ton about Potapenko, so I'm not going to speak to it really. But the only thing I'll say is if he's going to focus on the bigs, and obviously JB had success with that in Memphis and Cleveland. So I think it's a good hire. For the for the front office, I mean, similar story, but I think the returners are a little interesting. I mean, I think it was likely that these guys stayed, like George David and Dwayne Casey sticking around, and also Eric Tellum is in there. So, I mean, I don't know a ton about what Eric Tellum does for the team, obviously, but George David, I know, was assistant GM under Troy, and he was a big time agent back in the day. So a ton of relationships around the league. I like him sticking around. And Dwayne Casey, I mean, him, David, and probably Eric Tellum too, can be a resource for Langdon just to help with some of the stuff that happened here before he got here. One of the things I like that Langdon has said throughout his availabilities is it's going to be a team effort. He knows that he can't do everything on his own. So it seems like he brought resources that he's worked with before, he trusts. I mean, Dennis Lindsay is a guy that interviewed for Langdon's job. I think that's a massive hire to get someone like that. So I think they've assembled a good group. I can't fully speak to what it's going to turn out to be or what it's going to be like behind the scenes. I don't think anyone's really is privy to that other than potentially the beat writers. But it seems like there's been some good names put together to round out both the front office and the coaching staff.
All right, let's get into this next question here from our guy, Derek Brooks. He says, JB Bickerstaff was hired after the draft. So do you think Ron Holland still would have been the selection if Bickerstaff had been hired before the draft? He says, do you think maybe Donovan Clingan may have been discussed more?
I think Holland still would have been the pick. I don't know how much say the head coach would have. I mean, I think his opinion definitely would have been taken into account. And honestly, maybe Langdon and the front office knew they were leaning that way right before everything happened very quickly. Clingan, I mean, honestly, I thought he was going to be the pick when the Pistons were drafting. He was the highest player I had on my board that was still there. But the fact that he fell to Portland might say something. And I think over time, I mean, if you're going to invest in a 7-foot+ guy with a top 5 pick, who I love Clingan's athleticism, his rim protecting ability, I think he fills a clear need that this team has. But I think what the Holland pick tells us is Langdon sees where the organization is now, as they should still be taking big swings, especially with a top 5 pick, and take probably the guy with the highest upside left on the board. And the thing about bringing in Clingan with Bickerstaff in is I don't know if he necessarily, like, he's been in situations where he has had big men to build around, like build his offense and defense around, but I don't know if that's his ideal approach. Like, that might have just been the roster that he was dealt. So maybe it would have been discussed a little bit more, but I have a hard time thinking the draft pick would change because of that hire.
With the timing of how everything went down, I almost wonder if the eventual draft pick was something that they discussed with potential head coach hires in interviews, right? I mean, the ideal situation for any coach GM pairing is that they are on the same page when it comes to personnel decisions, be that free agency, trade, or the draft, right? So if you are in a position where you're actively scouting for the draft as the GM of the Detroit Pistons, you're also searching for a head coaching candidate. And we know that at least some portion of that vetting and search was happening at around the same time as the draft. Wouldn't it be great if you sit down with each of these guys and you just get a feel for where they're leaning on these draft prospects, what they like about players X, Y, and Z, and then just see who really lines up with you? So the fact that they hired Bickerstaff almost makes me think that Bickerstaff would have been leaning towards Ron Holland anyway, instead of Donovan Clingan. And on that, I do agree with you. I kind of think he was Bickerstaff, that is, was walked into situations where he had bigs that were very good defensive prospects, rather than he just loves investing in bigs who are very good defensive prospects.
For sure. And also JB was coaching in the playoffs. Like, who know? Obviously, you had a ton of teams around you that are preparing for the draft, evaluating these guys. I'm sure he did a good amount of that himself, but his focus was obviously on that for a while. And then condensed time into when he was let go and thrown in the interview cycle. Like, I'm sure there was alignment, like maybe not everyone in the front office agreed on what the pick was, but I think there was a collective agreement that this is the best pick for what we're trying to do, who we're trying to be moving forward. And yeah, I'm sure JB is part of that too. Like, I'm sure he was bought in with it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, every single coach has some level of input in who the team selects. They may not be the final or even a top 3, 4, 5, say in that decision, but you bet anything they are all definitely being asked, because they're going to have to coach these guys on a day-to-day basis. Let's go to this one from Michigan Dragons. It says, what are your thoughts on all of the Pistons coaches? How many have stayed from the coaching staff last year, and how many are new? I don't know about you. I've been offline for a couple weeks, so I don't have a great sense of where the entire coaching staff is at the moment, outside of some of the bigger names and like Sidney Lowe and how did you say it again? The guy that was just recently hired, Potapenko.
Yeah.
So outside of that, I don't have a great sense. So wondering if you do, and then what your thoughts are on how it's all coming together.
In terms of the returners, I think it's just Jarrett Jack. And also I saw Jamel McMillan, who coached the Crews last year. He was on the bench for the summer league team as well. So I think it's just those two who are the main returners. I mean, I'm sure there's some mainstays that stayed on, like in the video room, assistants, player development, people like that, like people working with the G League team. But those are the big ones that stick out to me. And in terms of thoughts on the coaching staff as a whole, I think there's been a lot of hires and all who specialize in different areas. I think we talked about it last week, but the splashiest one is bringing Fred Vinson in to help some of these young guys round out and work on their jump shot. So TBD how that's going to work, but I think that's the biggest one and the one that's received the most praise. Definitely deserve praise, but interested to see how that one is going to play out. Otherwise, I mean, yeah, a ton of guys with respected resumes. It seems like a good coaching staff to me, but also have to caveat that with there's a ton of guys that we're not familiar with, but they've seen success around the league elsewhere, and guys that have both been with Langdon and both with JB. So it's good to have a sense of familiarity with those two as they jump on with the organization. And also a couple names who were here, whether they were brought in with Monty or someone like Dwayne Casey, although he's not on the coaching staff anymore, who's been around for a while.
All right, let's jump into this one from Darylicious. It says he interprets the offseason as increasing the floor of the team, developing the young talent, and then putting the team in a position to be flexible cap-wise next year with free agents, trades, all that kind of stuff. So in a way, almost kicking the can off to next offseason. So he's wondering if we agree with that and what potentially would need to happen in order to lure free agents to Detroit next offseason.
Honestly, and probably not the best thing to say or hear, but I don't know if Detroit's ever going to be a premier free agent destination. Maybe there are guys, depending on what Cade turns into, there's some guys that want to come and play with Cade. I agree that the transactions that were made this offseason were a bit of increasing the floor of the team. The roster last year clearly wasn't anything close to cutting it and didn't put your young players that you're trying to build around in the best position for success. So now I think you added some guys who will help around them, help you out for a year, 2 years, half a season. If someone like Malik Beasley gets dealt at the trade deadline, and then you can maybe bring in a name that makes sense around your young guys that you're keeping for the long haul. I think a big thing about this upcoming season is figuring out which of your young players are going to be here for the long haul, because Jaden Ivy and Jalen Duren are going to be extension eligible. Not necessarily saying that either or both of them will get one, but the year after that, then it's Asar Thompson and Ron Holland. So you need to figure out which of these guys that you're going to try to keep in house, because how the Pistons are set up, it's eventually leading to a point where, are you going to pay these young players to stick around? Do you view them as a core piece of your franchise, or do you not, and you try to trade them or eventually let them walk in free agency?
And I understand how all of this could be a little, I guess, frustrating for fans who, like both of us, we have watched every game that these young players currently on the roster have played for the past however many years they've been on the team for each of them. So all of us individually absolutely have an idea of who these players are, and in our own minds what we think they can eventually become. The challenge is that Trajan Langdon doesn't. He admitted that with the New Orleans Pelicans, he wasn't really looking at the top of the draft, so that had to take place in a condensed time frame. The Pistons really weren't a threat to the Pelicans at any point this season, so I think it's also fair to wonder how much he was familiar with all of these young players on the roster, to the extent that he'd be comfortable making a long-term decision with any of them. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, it looks like this was a bit of a punt to next year to see, outside of Cade Cunningham, who he committed long-term money to, is there anyone else on this roster that, not excluding Ron Holland, because he just drafted Ron Holland. So he's naturally, Langdon is going to be naturally pretty confident in Ron Holland. So anyone outside of him that is worth keeping and investing in long term. And in order to do that, they need this roster to be set up in a way that it hasn't been at any point under the Troy Weaver era, like you said, with veterans that complement the players on the team, but are not taking minutes away from these guys to the extent that you wouldn't be able to get a good idea or a good feel for who they are and who they're going to become. So, yeah, I do think that this is a little bit of a trial year for guys like Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, and Asar Thompson, and they're going to have the opportunity to each of them prove it. Whether or not they do, we're going to find out.
And you're positioning yourself like, the team they should be better next year, but they're not going to be good. So you'll have another lottery pick at the very least. So that's potentially another young player that you're going to add in and work to develop. And the thing to me is, what's the goal? Are you trying to eventually take those steps in terms of player acquisition to position yourself for a trade like what New York did to bring in OG and Michael Bridges, like a high level, fairly young veteran that wants to stay around for a long, like, I think that's the ideal scenario. So what do you need to do to get to that? But also when you make that trade, you have to mortgage a lot of your future. So you better be at least sure about what you have in house. Because we're talking about luring free agents. I feel like the most likely path for this team to add someone else at a high level is via trade. The point when that big trade happens, I'm not sure. It feels like it's not this year, maybe the following season, but I think that's eventually the path and maybe the goal to get to. And that's why I think Langdon has preached accumulating assets where he can. I don't think he's gonna. We've seen how hard it is to get a first round pick in return. I don't know if you're gonna get those to soften the blow, but a bunch of seconds can turn into something. Like we saw what Houston got AJ Griffin for next to nothing. Interesting guys like that can hopefully help your roster in a little bit of a higher tier of player. I feel like is the most likely path forward to bringing players in that can help you and be a part of the franchise long term.
So you and I have been talking about this a little bit over the past couple of days, but this conversation leads right into it. And for the chat too, if you guys are watching live, throw in your answers to this as we go ahead and continue talking about it. But something I've been thinking about and not really understanding is this idea that seems to be out there in the Pistons fandom that Ron Holland just has no minutes to start off this season. And look, like we just got done talking about it, all the veterans on this team right now were brought in because they fill very specific roles that highlight and elevate the young players around them. We just got done talking about how this season is kind of a figure it out year, see what you have, and not necessarily a compete year where you want to win a ton of games. So why would you not have minutes for a guy like Ron Holland, who you just drafted at number 5 overall? Like, I'm not talking starting. We all agree he's not going to start. But off the bench, you're telling me there's not 10 to 15 for this kid to get? I think there absolutely is, and I've been pretty confused about it as I've seen the conversation develop.
Yeah, you should find minutes for him. I mean, you drafted him 5th overall. The Pistons have picked number 5 the past 2 years, and both of those players have played a lot coming out of the gate. Where it gets a little murky for me is, and just to be clear, like I think Ron Holland is going to play somewhat. I don't think he'll have a huge role, but I think he'll play. I just think if JB Bickerstaff decides to go strictly like 9-man, it turns into a numbers game for me where I think Holland is almost number 10 on the pecking order, but I don't think that's a good enough reason to just not play Ron Holland at all. Hopefully, I mean, one of a lot of people's big complaints with Monty Williams was running a super deep rotation that didn't really make much sense, doing some all bench units. So hopefully that's not what we see with JB Bickerstaff. And even if we don't see that, like, I think there's still ways to put Holland in there and give him that 10 to 15 minutes a game to start out, like you said, and then grow it from there.
And here's the thing with that 9-man rotation idea. Like, I get it. Bickerstaff was a 9-man rotation in Cleveland. I believe he was at the end of his tenure in Memphis as well. But those were all good teams. Why on earth would one of the top 5 youngest rosters in the NBA, which I did the math and they are, I don't know where they are in the top 5, but I know they're up there. This is going to be one of the youngest rosters in the league. Why would you run a short rotation with that? If you were the GM, why would you let your coach run a short rotation with that? This whole season is about getting young players minutes in advantageous situations. That's why you went out and got Tobias Harris. That's why you bring back Fontecchio. That's why you trade for THJ and why you add Malik Beasley. Like, these guys aren't studs that are supposed to be taking minutes away from your guys. They're supposed to help your guys. But because they need to help them, those guys have to play. Like, you can't just send Holland down to the G League and say, well, you know, we have Malik Beasley off the bench and that's going to help him with floor spacing. He's not getting minutes. Like, no, I agree. He's the 10th guy in what should be a 10 or 11 man rotation.
Yeah, I think if Ron Holland is racking up a bunch of DNP CDs, there's something wrong.
A bigger problem.
Yeah, there's something wrong, and that will be discussed, I guess, internal. I don't think it'll happen, like you said, just where the team is. It doesn't make sense to just put your 5th overall pick automatically out of the rotation because you're trying to keep it strictly to 9 guys. I think we all have a bit of PTSD from Monty Williams and those like going 11 men deep in the first quarter, and one of those isn't Marcus Sasser. Like, I think it's a totally different situation. And another one of the things that has been talked about in JB's introductory presser and Langdon's is they're trying to make this thing like cohesive from the top down. That's a lot easier said than done, but I believe it. I could be wrong and look back on that and think it was silly to believe in it, but it makes sense. That I don't have any reason not to trust that that's the goal. And honestly, I for JB, I think there are some benefits to playing Ron Holland right away, like not just to get him minutes. I think he can really help the team in some ways, especially off the bench. So while in an ideal world, I think a 9-man rotation would be great. I just think the combination of where this team is and the roster that they have, it's most likely going to be a 10-man rotation with Holland rounding it out and getting somewhere in that 10 to 15 minute range a night, like you were saying.
And here's the last thing that I'll mention too. You just look at this roster right now. Count the forwards and wings. You've got Simone Fontecchio, Tobias Harris, Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, and Bobby Klintman. That's it. That's 5 players for roughly 4 rotation spots primarily. Obviously, Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to moonlight a little bit at the 3. You could have Cade Cunningham moonlight a little bit at the 3. Isaiah Stewart occasionally could get minutes at the 4. These things are going to happen, so it's not a perfect split. But in terms of who's getting the majority of minutes at starting 3-4 and backup 3-4, you really only have 5 players that are going to eat up the majority of it. And if your choice is between, because you're probably going to run a 10 or 11 man rotation, like we're saying, this is a very young team. So if your choice is between Ron Holland, number 5 overall pick that you believe has superstar upside, is a high energy defender and an incredible athlete to get on transition, or Bobby Klintman, who can shoot and was a 2nd round pick, yeah, you should really be investing in Ron Holland, I would say.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I know after the summer league performance, it'll be disappointing if Bobby Klintman isn't playing a ton, but I just think, like, in the same light of what I was saying with Holland, just it being a numbers game and not really finding the minutes and role for him, I think that just might be the reality of it to start. And hopefully he gets some run in the G League, gets a few minutes here and there when injuries pop up, and then build up upon it from there. But yeah, the transactions they've made have made it interesting. And also, I mean, this is way down the line, but when we do get to the trade deadline, you have some pieces that can help teams that are contending, like Malik Beasley. I know the playoffs that Tim Hardaway Jr. had, but maybe someone is interested in his expiring. So then rotation spots and minutes can open up from there. So we don't know what it'll build into as these guys get a few minutes under their belt, and then hopefully it builds up to more from that.
Quickly, before we do a voicemail question, let's do this one from YouTube user. He says, of the 15 minutes that Ron Holland plays, about how many he play with Asar or Jalen Duren. I'm going to spin this though for you, because are you worried about that? Truthfully, I'm not all that worried. if you have a situation where Ron Holland is getting minutes with Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren, I would be very concerned. But Ron Holland is just a poor shooter. He's not a non-shooter. I think Ron Holland is probably going to end up in that 25 to 30% range from three his rookie season, just based on what we've seen from him in the G League and even in Summer League. So I'm not too worried about it for short bursts if you surround Holland and Asar with three shooters, or Holland and Duren with three shooters. I get that a lot of people seem to compare Ron Holland with Asar Thompson, but Asar Thompson is a significantly worse three-point shooter and takes less three-point shots. Should take less three-point shots too. So Asar and Duren versus Holland and Duren, completely different question.
Right. I'm with you there. I think it's more of a concern if you're playing Asar and Duren next to each other. Like, hopefully we see none of that.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll happen at certain points, but hopefully not much at all, because then you just have to strategically set the rest of the lineup around those guys to make up for the spacing. But yeah, I mean,
and it might not even cover it.
Yeah, it's a good point from YouTube user, because if we're saying Holland is likely the 10th guy in the pecking order at this time, I don't think either you or I really think Thompson is starting out of the gate. So that might mean that there's some bench minutes with both of them together. And yeah, like the spacing concern is definitely scary there. Like, hopefully you have Stewart as the backup five who can at least stretch it out a little bit. Hopefully he gets respected a little bit more, but then you almost have to put Malik Beasley or Tim Hardaway Jr. next to it. Like, and maybe Fontecchio is staggered, whatever it might be, to hopefully make up for the concern as hopefully Holland develops into a better shooter, maybe not immediately, but eventually. Like, hopefully he can get to that league average range.
I'll just say I am genuinely hopeful that we get a short spurt, call it 5 minutes, just about every game, of Ron Holland and Asar Thompson out there together. I think there's a lot of potential for that on the wing. The athleticism would be a lot of fun. And if you set it up with Cade Cunningham, Malik Beasley, and Isaiah Stewart or Paul Reed, it could be very, very entertaining. And I'm excited to watch when that happens. Let's get to this question here. This is a voicemail from Josh, and it is about the young players eventually, hopefully, fingers crossed, becoming all-star caliber players.
Hey, fellas, it's Josh from South Dakota. First time, long time. My question for you, out of the young guys, Ivy, Holland, Asar, Duren, who do you think is most likely to make an all-star game at some point in their careers? To me, no question, it's Ivy. He had a very good rookie season and a down sophomore season where his coach didn't believe in him and the team didn't care. He's shot 34% from three both years. Duren and Asar can't even touch that. He has an elite first step. No one can stay in front of him other than maybe the Thompson twins, and we have one of those. He's shown some passing chops. This next year, with improved spacing, I think the sky's the limit. I believe he'll be starting in the backcourt, but also playing backup point guard. They'll be staggering the two. One of them will be on the court at all times. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks.
All right, Blake. So what do you think of the current young players that are not Cade Cunningham? Who would you put your faith behind in making an all-star game first?
Yeah, thanks for the call, Josh. It's a great question, and it was a great case for Ivy. If the question was which of the young guys named will make an all-star game first, I think I would agree that it's Ivy, but I think at some point in their careers, the most likely answer is Holland. I mean, he just has the upside to me where he could be potentially a second star next to Cade more than Ivy. maybe Jaden Ivy is traded and he pops off and has a crazy season. But I just think Holland has the scoring potential. Agreed with Josh that Duren and Asar, they don't really have the scoring chops to get there for me. So it's between Ivy and Holland. I lean Holland just because of the athleticism, everything he does, the upside he has to score maybe like 20, 25 points a game at some point, and he's a better fit next to Cade. But I think Ivy is neck and neck to me. I don't know if there's a path to Ivy being an all-star in Detroit necessarily, but I think he had, like what I'm saying about Holland, you can say the same things about Ivy other than like the Holland's a little bit better as a defender. So yeah, I think it's most likely for me if Ivy gets traded, he'll be that guy, but I'd have to lean Holland even though it's close for me.
I think it's a really tough question. I'm between the same two guys, Ivy or Ron Holland. Ivy's definitely closer than Ron Holland is. I mean, that's both a product of him being in year 3 and Ron Holland being a fairly raw rookie. But the thing with Jaden Ivy is that all that matters for all-star appearances is offense. So Jaden Ivy is going to need to become a much more aggressive scorer than he's been at any point in his first 2 seasons in Detroit. I don't know how realistic that is. I'm not sure if that's just his DNA or if it's something that was a bit of a product of having to play so much point guard in his rookie year under Dwayne Casey, and then Monty Williams not necessarily elevating him as a scorer in every game plan night to night. I'll say that when he was with Purdue, the excitement around Jaden Ivy was not necessarily that he's a guy that will frequently give you, 30 points a night and average 27, 28, 29 points per game. The excitement around Jaden Ivy was that he was a guy that looked like he probably could get close to or slightly above that 25 points per game mark, but also, 5 assists, get to the free throw line a ton, rebound the basketball, and just basically be an incredibly effective secondary ball handler. So it wasn't necessarily that he was the super scorer prospect. It was that he was a very good scoring prospect and did a lot of other things that were exciting. Ron Holland, I might argue, has the highest scoring potential on the team and would therefore be very likely to get an all-star game if he hits his potential. And I'd say that's even, I'm including Cade Cunningham in that one. Ron Holland as just a pure scorer of the basketball. One, he's really willing. He puts up a lot of shots, some shots that he probably shouldn't be taking right now, but he puts them up. The guy wants to get buckets. He's great at creating space. He's got pretty good touch around the rim, and he's athletic as all get out. So in terms of a guy that one day could average close to 30 a night, it's Ron Holland. And Cade Cunningham would have to increase his percentages to an almost Steph Curry-esque point before he's really going to approach that type of scoring number. The problem with Ron Holland is how raw he is. How likely is it that he gets to that level, the Jaylen Brown-esque ceiling? I don't know. I just don't know. So I think I'm going to lean Jaden Ivy, but I'm not comfortable with it.
Oh yeah, the thing about saying Ron Holland for this is that, like, I could be very wrong. I feel like maybe even of the full group, it's the highest likelihood of being wrong, but I think in the same vein, it's the highest likelihood of he could be an all-star. Like, that's the thing about bringing Ron Holland in is it's a swing. He, like you said, he's very raw right now. You don't know what he's going to develop into. You've seen flashes of it. You hope he can mold his game, but right now it's it's an unknown. I mean, as it should be.
Yeah, the thing, probably the exciting thing with Ron Holland is that he legitimately has primary score potential while still profiling as a pretty dang good defender. He's not an Asar Thompson level defensive prospect. Not many are, but he still profiles as a pretty dang good one. So yeah, I'm gonna stick with Jaden Ivy. YouTube user brings up Jalen Duren. He says that he could score the ball enough to potentially be an all-star, but he would need to improve as a defender. I don't even know about the scoring thing. He doesn't do enough of it on his own, and he's not necessarily how do I say? He hasn't shown enough skill to really make me intrigued by the idea of scoring on his own more, like Bam Adebayo does. So yeah, I'm leading Jaden Ivy. Any other thoughts before we get to one more question?
No, I mean, for me, my answer really just lies with I think Holland's a better fit next to Cade, which raises his ceiling of what he can do and his scoring potential. And I mean, if Jaden Ivy was traded and he's in a different situation, like I might lean towards Jaden Ivy, but just Ron's potential right now is what stands out to me.
I just quickly want to do a shout out to Dr. Dave, who had a very good question about Anthony Simons, who seems like he's now reignited at some trade rumors about the Pistons maybe targeting him. We won't have time for it since it's a live comment. I'm not going to be able to save it for next week. So just wanted to shout you out. Really appreciate that. It was a good question. But I wanted us to end on a fun one here from our guy, a fella in the DBB comments. He says, what do you think will be the first highlight play of this season?
It's tough because my gut is telling me a Ron Holland dunk, like similar to the one he did in Summer League. That was that reverse. And then LeBron did the very same dunk in a Team USA scrimmage the next day. But being that we both think that Ron Holland is going to come off the bench, I don't know if maybe it is the first highlight play of the season, but I don't know if it's necessarily fair to say that. So I'm going to go with, and I wish my mind wasn't on Summer League right now, but remember that like Jaden Ivy, Jalen Duren lob play, like maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's not Jaden Ivy as the ball handler. Maybe it's Cade. So yeah, I'll go with something like that. The only other thing that's sticking out in my head, and Wes, hopefully I'm not talking too much and like taking anything that you're going to say, but I feel like a Cade Cunningham, like take someone ankles, step back three would be really nice. Like what he did to Jokic in his rookie season. And depending on what the play is or what the schedule looks like, who they open with, maybe Cade can catch someone and make us all really excited in game one or whatever it is.
All right, here's my question before I answer. Are we talking highlight like the Pistons official Twitter account tweets out the clip and says some pithy remark on top of it? Or are we talking like SportsCenter top 10 highlight for the evening?
I think it's just like vibes. Like we decide what the highlight play is. Like if it's good enough. I mean, the Pistons Twitter will probably tweet a bunch of highlights. Like they have
always
to.
do. Yeah.
But maybe let's say the first one that gets some love on like national NBA Twitter, like one of those big accounts that aggregates things, tweets out something like that.
All right, cool. I've got an answer. Before I give that, you just reminded me of a very, very sad memory. Do you remember, this was a couple years ago now, the Pistons are playing Oklahoma City. It's a very late season game. Cade Cunningham is hurt. They're getting blown out. And the Pistons Twitter account tweets out a Killian Hayes mid-range pull-up from the free throw line. It wasn't even a swish. It hit the front of the rim, bounced way up and went in. And that was just like one of those, oh my God, this really was the best highlight they could find.
Do you remember, were they in Oklahoma City for that?
I think so.
Okay, because I remember there was like the end of the year when players were getting shut down. Killian had a great game in Oklahoma City, so
That was his rookie year, I think, right?
yeah, probably. But if that's the case, then I do faintly I remember the game. I don't know if I necessarily remember the play.
Yeah, I don't know. You brought up that they tweet a bunch of stuff out, and I had a little like war flashbacks of just this really bad mid-range pull-up that was wide open and wasn't even a clean hit. And they're like, Killian Hayes, yes. Like, oh God. Anyway,
poor Killian. The social
Poor
team
Killian.
should have a ton of stuff to play with this year, which is exciting. I'm sure that stuff makes their job tough.
Lord, yeah, absolutely it does. And Lord, I hope they have more. But anyway, so my official answer, I'm going with Cade Cunningham, fourth quarter and one. I mean, you know, a little Euro step, something, get some contact, make it. And it's in game one, so hopefully it's close like the Miami one. And all the aggregators, ESPN, they're going to say, wow, look how good Cade Cunningham looks right now. And that's going to be the first one that gets some traction. That's my bet.
And Cade does his signature, is like the flex he does.
The flex and scream at the ground.
When he yells. Yeah, I feel like we didn't get a ton of those last season. But if we do that and we get that back, that would be a great one for this.
Agreed. All right. That was a good one, fella. Thank you for that question. Guys in the live chat room as well, thank you for your questions. And Josh, that was a great one over voicemail. We love, I mean, I can't speak for you, but I love these voicemail questions. It's a lot of fun it's just so much fun to hear all your guys' voices. We really appreciate it. I appreciate the time it takes me to do it. So thank you for all of those. Blake, go ahead and close us out. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, and Josh, all the way from South Dakota, we appreciate that. Can't say I knew we had listeners in South Dakota. So a great question. We appreciate it. Reminder to everyone to please like the YouTube stream, subscribe to the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel when you can. You've helped us a ton getting those numbers up. So we really appreciate that. The more and more we can get just helps us get this thing out here and helps us do more and more cool stuff. So we really appreciate it. And if you do want to call the number to ask a question and hear your voice on the show, the number for that is 313-355-2717. And special thanks to our guy, Sean Corp, the managing editor over at Detroit Bad Boys, for always supporting the show. And shout out to you guys for the great questions and talking points tonight. We'll catch you next week, whether on your commute or live with us on YouTube. We can't wait to talk more Detroit basketball with you all.